CGTN, China Global Television Network. Live from London, this is Global Business.
Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Jamie Owen.
And I'm Robin Dwyer. Our top stories. The Asia-Pacific should not be an arena for a big power contest. A message from China's president.
Our other headlines, the UK's finance minister raises taxes on the wealthy to pay out more for pensioners and state benefits as the government tries to rebuild confidence.
More missile strikes reported across Ukraine, leaving 4 people dead and several injured in one of the most intense bombardments of the war.
And expectation and frustration at the United Nations climate talks in Egypt. A final text emerges, but there is much missing.
The Asia-Pacific should not be an arena for a big power contest. That's the message from Chinese President Xi Jinping, arriving in Thailand for an annual summit with leaders in the region.
The gathering will cover issues ranging from climate change to the war in Ukraine and the global economy. Xi Jinping has warned against attempts to start a new Cold War in the Asia-Pacific. Our correspondent Zhao Yongfei reports.
A paradigm shift, a balanced and sustainable economy. These are the key terms that the host country of Thailand put in this year's APEC agenda. CEO and other world economic leaders gather here in Bangkok to discuss the opportunities and challenges in the world today. Chinese President Xi Jinping delivered a written speech at this year's APEC CEO summit. He says over the past decade, the Asia-Pacific economies have overcome market fragmentation and conducted opening up in vast space for economic development. It says such a far-sighted vision in the Asia-Pacific should carry on to seize the opportunities of economic globalization. Development has always been a theme of APEC. It becomes even more vital when the world continues facing challenges in multiple fronts. Since the pandemic, China has been advocating strategic development patterns on each annual APEC CEO summit. In 2020, President Xi said China would foster a new development paradigm with domestic and international circulations reinforcing each other. In 2021, President Xi emphasized sustainable development to seek a balance between economic growth and energy consumption. New development pattern and sustainable growth, both ideas contribute to high-quality development. In his written speech, President Xi indicates APEC economies should build stable industrial and supply chains by following the laws to govern economic activities and market principles. He says unilateralism and protectionism should be rejected by all. China respects rules. It will further expand opening up and adhere global standards and rules and further protect the interests of foreign investors. President Xi called for the actions of technological revolution and industrial transformation. He says it is important to pursue green and low-carbon development. China has an enormous market, and it is open to the world for high-quality trade and investment opportunities.
China is one of the greatest powers in the world, and with that kind of power and economic strength comes global responsibilities. So I see China gradually elevating itself to that position.
I would say the One Belt, One Road. This is one of the really a great roadmap to making about the logistics, to the country that are not facing to the ocean.
President Xi Jinping's arrival to Thailand has a big impact, especially today's meeting. This year marks the 10th year of how China and Thailand built relationship, and today's his arrival actually meant a lot.
China's high-quality development strategy correlates with Thailand's bio-circular green economy model. Under the Belt and Road Initiative, the construction of the China-Laos-Thailand Railway and other infrastructure connectivity projects is underway. With economic order and unlimited potential, China has sent a positive signal to CEO leaders to contribute to a more united Asia-Pacific community. Zhao Yongfei, CGTN, Bangkok.
The UK has raised taxes on the richest to pay more money to pensioners and to increase state benefits. Finance Minister Jeremy Hunt said the UK was already in recession, but that his plan will help rebuild the economy and reduce debt. Hunt is hoping the statement will restore Britain's fiscal credibility after it was damaged by his predecessor's unfunded tax-cutting plan.
Well, our correspondent Andrew Wilson has been crunching the numbers. So a swathe of tax rises and spending cuts. Just take us through what's been announced.
Well, crunching the numbers, Jeremy, I've never seen so many numbers in a short hour in Parliament. The Chancellor, the Finance Minister, went over pretty much everything from start to finish in a gesture to the public, in a gesture to his own MPs, in a gesture, of course, to the country and also the markets watching in the wings to see if England can, or Britain can, regain some of its financial respectability that it lost recently. The context is important. Only 8 weeks ago, the Chancellor left in disgrace, followed swiftly by the Prime Minister, Liz Truss, as well, because they went into the House of Commons, they announced willy-nilly all sorts of tax cuts without any sort of real explanation of how that was going to happen, without any crunching of the numbers, as you say, and as a result, the markets took fright. Britain took a dip, the economy went badly, and Jeremy Hunt will be very mindful of two things. One, that he doesn't want that to happen again, and two, he's also on the firing line now, so he's seen what happens to a Chancellor that gets it wrong. So he started with the early stuff, tax cuts across the board, but mainly to the richest people. People earning over £150,000, $170,000, now currently get a high rate of tax. That's now been brought down to £125,000, more like $135,000. So that's going to affect a lot of people. It's going to bring in a lot of money, but it's going to affect a lot of middle-class people, people who are professionals, who have worked hard to get where they are. It's going to be potentially, politically, a demotivator for people. But remember that these are tax rises coming in now and spending cuts just after Chancellor Kwarteng 8 weeks ago said he was going to cut a similar amount. So it's a complete shift as far as the UK public is concerned. That's the first thing they'll take on board, this idea that people earning fairly good salaries are going to start paying more. The other big crunch that landed today in the House of Commons was that the predictions now are that the UK is currently in recession. By the end of this year, it's probably going to lose something like 1.4% of its economic growth. That should go up in 24 to 1.3, 25, 2.6, anemic numbers. The UK, it's been made clear by the Chancellor today, is in a much worse situation than people might have imagined, and it really is teetering on the brink of where to go next in terms of growth and in terms of public spending and in terms of how to bring the country forward. There's going to be capital gains tax, there's going to be taxes on sale of homes, there's going to be income thresholds are going to be changed. Those will all be further down the line. This is a plan the Chancellor has put in stages. But the immediate message at the moment is a windfall tax on energy and tax on people earning fairly decent salaries to start refilling the Treasury's lost funds from the pandemic, from the war in Ukraine, and from the incompetence, perhaps, of the previous Chancellor. This was a huge moment for both the new Chancellor and his Prime Minister. People's lives, economic stability, and Britain's economic standing in the world all on the line. The warnings were sent out early that this would be tough, and it was. A freeze on tax thresholds, increase in local taxes, windfall taxes on energy producers, and the headline, more income tax for high earners.
The first difficult decision I take on tax is to reduce the threshold at which the 45p rate becomes payable from £150,000 to £125,140. Those earning £150,000 or more will pay just over £1,200 more in tax every year.
It's official. The UK is now in recession, with predictions by the Office of Budget Responsibility of further shrinkage, and the conflict in Ukraine as the chief culprit. Growth is not expected until 2024.
The UK, like other countries, is now in recession. Overall this year, the economy is still forecast to grow by 4.2%. GDP then falls in 2023 by 1.4%, before rising by 1.3%, 2.6% and 2.7% in the following 3 years.
But this is politics as well as economics, so pension rises remain linked to inflation, currently at 11%. There'll be a little more support for energy bills next year and more spending on health and education. This autumn statement sets the stage for the next 5 or 10 years of British politics.
and the polls expect the opposition to be in power after 2, left to build policy on this statement.
3 Prime Ministers, 4 Chancellors and 4 budgets later. And where do we find ourselves? In a worse place than we started the year. Inflation spiralling, growth plunging, living standards falling.
The Chancellor said he was heading into the coming storm, and he is, in stages. Taxes up now, spending cuts tapered over the coming decade. Ultimately, what the markets will want are signs of 2 things: stability and, of course, growth.
So, Andrew, is this budget going to be enough to reassure the markets, rather that the UK is now in responsible hands?
Well, that's definitely the plan. The phrase we hear a lot of these days is pitch rolling. It's a cricketing term. What it basically means is laying the ground ahead of things happening. There was a lot of pitch rolling for this speech today. People weren't surprised by what came, apart from the quotes about recession. And so the message going out to the markets in the end will be that we understand that the biggest debt killer around is growth. We are going after growth. We have to get our house in order. Compare us to Kwasi Kwarteng. The Chancellor will be saying to the markets, look, we've been much more thorough. We've got people backing up our figures. We've got the Office of Budget Responsibility on board. This is our plan. In the speech, he set all sorts of 5-year and 10-year targets. The markets like that as well. They like chancellors that set targets and intend to stick to them. It gives them a whole idea that the situation is under control. So far, the markets haven't taken fright. Nothing really particularly drastic has happened since the end of the Chancellor's speech. So the signs are thus far that the pitch rolling worked. People were prepared for it, but also that the Chancellor has given something of a convincing argument that he and Rishi Sunak are taking this seriously.
Andrew, thanks very much. Our correspondent, Andrew Wilson.
Well, let's talk now to Justin Urquhart-Stewart, co-founder of Seven Investment Management and a distinguished financial commentator. Justin, what did you make of it?
I have to say, Andrew, our correspondent, was absolutely right. Pitch rolling, I think they were using the heavy roller for this one over the past few days, laying it on thick and hard, that it was going to be a difficult budget. Everyone's going to have to start paying more. It's going to be tiresome. But the main aim was actually to create confidence, because obviously after the fiasco we had a few weeks ago of this, the mini budget where they went horribly wrong, this was to actually create confidence in the investment markets, to actually say the new management, new control, and already we've seen a change in some of the market rates to actually show that confidence has come through, but also to individuals, to the citizens of Britain, because they're unnerved not just by what happened the other week, but of course they know the energy prices are going up very dramatically and there's a high rate of inflation. And so they're extremely worried, and interest rates have gone up, and those with mortgages are going to be suffering pain with that. So again, he was trying to get more confidence there by saying there will be support for people, and this is how it's actually going to operate. And then the third party to actually give confidence to, actually the rest of the world, to actually say that the British economy is damaged, it's not doomed, and this is actually how it recovers.
How much of this do you think was about pain postponed, in the sense that many of these measures will not take action for some time, and the fiscal landscape could change as well as the political landscape, couldn't it? Fuel prices could reduce, cost of borrowing could come down, we might even have a change of government.
Heaven forfend, yes, another Prime Minister. We could do with one. We'd have a fresh one every so often. It's quite useful. But no, the point is a very good question, because actually what's going to be happening is those changes will probably come through in 2 or 3 years' time. What this Chancellor has done is laid a few political traps for the opposition. Because when it comes to that next election, they can turn around to the opposition and say, so are you going to do these cuts or not? So they really can't win that argument very easily. So yes, he's delayed the pain till 2 or 3 years hence, but in the meantime hoping that the cost of fuel and energy drops, the inflation comes down, which is quite likely. We've seen American inflation figures already starting coming down, and the inflation spike starts to go away. So in 2 years' time, you'll start seeing a recovery. May not be a dramatic recovery, but a bit more confidence coming back in. If you've got confidence, then you might just scrape in another election win. But it's a far cry at the moment.
I wonder what your clients might be make of this, in the sense that middle-class people like teachers and police and doctors will suddenly find that they're paying a lot more tax than perhaps they might have expected, and presumably they're not going to be investing their nest eggs so quickly.
Well, put it this way, if they put their money back into the bank, they'll be losing even more money with inflation running at double-digit figures. So then what's the choice? Under the bed, in the bank, or investing it somewhere to get a long-term reasonable return? Remember, good investment isn't about stock market going up and down. Wouldn't necessarily listen to silly idiots in red braces for that. No, good investment is actually making sure you're getting a return on your dividends, compounding the returns over the longer term. So telling people investment is a long-term issue, not a short-term one. If you want a short-term investment, well, that's why we have horse racing.
Justin, thank you very much for that. Justin Urquhart-Stewart, co-founder at Seven Investment Management.
So how have the US markets reacted to the UK budget? Let's talk to our correspondent in New York, John Terrett. John, what's the verdict where you are?
Yes. Well, I'll tell you something. The answer to that really is Jeremy Hunt himself. I mean, talk about cometh the moment, cometh the man. I mean, it's extraordinary. Here's a man who's had a relatively checkered political career, a man who did not do well in the first leadership contest, didn't run in the second leadership contest because he wanted this job and he's got it, and Wall Street's pretty happy about that. And if you look at the first word out of his mouth in the House of Commons today, that word was stability, and that is what Wall Street is looking for. I'm afraid memories of Trussonomics are very raw here. A couple of weeks ago now, maybe a couple of months since it happened, but they remember the contagion threat to US pension schemes. They remember the borrowing of billions of dollars in order to fund tax cuts. And you could say, well, the markets are ruling the governments now. And that's true, there's an argument for that. But I think also, it's also been true going back over history. If you remember when Britain was bounced out of the European exchange rate mechanism in 1992, it was the markets that had a very, very big upper hand in all of that. And Andrew, in his report just now, was saying that the markets haven't really moved too much. Here, I'm going to show you in a second, the stock markets are down a little bit, but the pound has been rising. It's about 118 to the dollar now, I think. And there was no wobble really in gilts and bonds when this announcement came out. I do notice that the two big oil majors, Chevron and Exxon, are down about 1% to 2% each. That could be because of the windfall tax being imposed by the Chancellor on energy companies. I think it's more to do with the general malaise here today. Of course, finally, overhanging all of this is none of us knows when the UK economy is going to reach its peak pain and its peak inflation. We think a year from now. No growth, as Andrew was saying, is predicted until 2024, and that's a pretty meager 1.3%. And of course, there's still no trade deal on the table between Washington and London, with the Northern Ireland Protocol a major, major sticking point. Anyway, the numbers. The Dow is down 240 points at the moment, and the S&P 500 is down 45 points. I have to tell you, I think that's more to do with members of the Federal Reserve who are squawking. They're talking like they've never talked before, basically ruling out any chance of a pause in interest raising here in this economy anytime soon. It ain't going to happen, guys.
John, let's talk about Elon Musk, because he's been telling staff at Twitter that they need to work long hours.
Yeah, long hours or leave the company. You know, I've got to say, this is very much an American thing. When I first came here 20 years ago, it was obvious that people, even in quite high positions, were only getting 2 weeks leave a year, and they tend to take it around July the 4th and at Christmas time. Of course, it's been muddled now by working from home, but I think Musk is resurrecting that attitude over at Twitter. There's an email which has been seen and is widely available in the media here, in which he talks about needing to come up with extremely hardcore work in order to form Twitter 2.0. Long hours, high intensity, and exceptional performance will basically be the only passing grade that is acceptable. So he's transforming the company, as you know, no work from home, 8 hours a day at your desk, no occasional days off, which was permitted under the old regime. Ironically, Elon Musk is actually in court at the moment, in the Court of Chancery in Delaware, where shareholders of his other company, Tesla, are accusing him of manipulating his pay packet in 2018 of $56 billion. They say he put pressure on the board and what he did was illegal. He says, look, I'm not paid to punch clocks at the beginning and the end of the day, and when I take holidays, it's email with a view. In other words, pointing out that he does work extremely hard. He did say yesterday in Delaware, in testimony, that he plans to stand aside from Twitter. We're back to Twitter now. Stand aside from Twitter and let somebody else run it eventually, which is what I said several weeks ago when he took over the company. In the meantime, Tesla shares today are down 2%. I give you the Twitter shares, but of course they don't exist anymore. It's a private company. Guys.
John, thanks very much. Our correspondent John Terrett in New York.
Well, back on this side of the pond, inflation in the Eurozone was slightly less than expected in October, but is nonetheless at a record high. Eurostat says last month prices increased at an annual rate of 10.6%, compared with its earlier forecast of 10.7%. In September, inflation across the zone's 19 countries stood at 9.9%. The cost of energy, of course, has been the main factor.
The UK government has blocked the takeover of Britain's largest microchip plant by a Chinese-owned company, saying the deal may undermine national security. Dutch chipmaker Nexperia, a subsidiary of China's Wingtech, acquired Welsh chip firm Newport Wafer Fab last year. Nexperia has been told it must now sell 86% of its stake. It says it will appeal the decision. China has long been urging the UK to provide its companies with a fairer business environment.
The crypto trading platform Genesis has stopped people making withdrawals from its lending unit because of what it called unprecedented market turmoil after the crypto exchange FTX collapsed. Genesis is one of the biggest financial services providers in the crypto market. The founder of FTX is facing legal action over the failure of the company, which has sent shockwaves throughout the crypto industry.
Thousands of gamers across China are lamenting the end of the game Warcraft. Blizzard Entertainment and NetEase say the popular game will no longer be available in the country, announcing the end of their 14-year partnership. California-based Blizzard said it was unable to secure a deal with China-based NetEase. News was the most trending topic on China's social media platform Weibo, with more than 100 million views.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, 4 people killed and several others injured in the latest Russian bombardment of Ukraine. We'll be in Kyiv next.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos? And unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
There's a new agenda for a new world, accelerating change in almost every part of our lives. It's shifting the norms of how we work, travel, and connect. How we think, interact, and develop. It's a new reality, a new agenda with me, Juliet Mann.
A grouping of 21 member economies, APEC members account for 60% of global GDP and are home to nearly 3 billion people. The Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation leaders are gathering in Bangkok, Thailand, to discuss regional challenges and how to build a more open, connected and balanced world for the future. CGTN reporters on the ground bring you the highlights of the meeting, as well as the issues and challenges the world is facing. Exploring visions for a shared future, only on CGTN.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe. Just a reminder that CGTN is available to watch for free on all the major digital platforms, on Smart TV or online on Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, YouTube, Dailymotion, CGTN.com and the CGTN app, and in the UK on Freeview.
Ukraine says it's come under renewed attack from Russian shelling, which has left 4 people dead in the region of Zaporizhzhia.
Missiles have fallen on the cities of Dnipro and Odessa, with President Volodymyr Zelensky describing fierce battles across the Donetsk region. Russian cruise missiles have also been shot down over the capital, Kyiv. It follows intense shelling on Tuesday that left homes across much of Ukraine without heating or electricity, just as the first winter snow falls.
Well, let's talk to our correspondent, Shamim Chowdhury in Kyiv. Shamim, what's the latest you have on those most recent missile strikes?
Well, Jamie, as you mentioned, a number of people have been killed in Zaporizhzhia city. It happened at 9 o'clock this morning. We understand that the aim had been what's been described as critical infrastructure, although what specifically that is, we haven't been told. Now, further up in another city just north of Zaporizhzhia, Dnipro city, 23 people were injured, 15 in hospital and 1 critically. Now, that target apparently had been a gas extraction station, a gas production station. What's noticeable about this is that up until now, electricity infrastructure had been targeted by the Russians. It seems today is the first day that gas infrastructure is also now part of the target. Elsewhere, we're told that from Belarus, 6 Iranian-supplied Shahed kamikaze drones were fired into the northern parts of Ukraine. All of them were intercepted. In the south, the Russians, coming from the Defense Ministry, fired at least 6 missiles into southern Ukraine from ships in the Black Sea. So it's absolutely a day of strikes north, west and south, all around many parts of Ukraine.
Yesterday is being described by many commentators as one of the most intense days of bombardment since this all started. How do you sense the country is dealing with this? How is Ukraine coping with that?
Well, from a kind of psychological perspective, the country is in shock. It was actually on the 15th of November when 111 missiles were fired in all across the country. Pan-Ukraine attack it was, attacking 12 major cities across the country. Most of those, it has to be said, 102 of them were deflected by air defense system, most of them provided by the US. Some of them did, however, land, 2 in Kyiv, causing 2 buildings to be set on fire. The really ongoing significance of this is the power outages. As you've just mentioned, it's the first of the snow here in Kyiv today and in other parts of the country. It's really very cold. We're being told by energy officials that 40% of the country can expect to have no power at any given time. And I can tell you, 1 hour here without power, without heating, is pretty unbearable. They're saying that to rebuild the infrastructure that's been damaged could take as much as 8 months in certain parts of the country, parts such as Lviv, which really suffered severe power shortages for quite some time after the bombardment. So we've had, until recently, until a few days ago, we've had scheduled power cuts here, so 4 hours on, 4 hours off, but we're being told that that will now go down to between 2 and 3 hours. As I say, it is very, very cold here, but this really is going to be the reality of millions of Ukrainians as winter gets even colder, for the foreseeable future.
Shamim, thanks for that. Our correspondent Shamim Chowdhury in Kyiv.
A Dutch court has found 3 men guilty of murder for the shooting down of Malaysian Airlines flight MH17 that killed all 298 passengers and crew on board. The men, 2 Russians and 1 Ukrainian, were sentenced to life in jail. A 3rd Russian man was acquitted. The plane, which was travelling from Amsterdam to Kuala Lumpur, was shot down using a Russian-made missile over eastern Ukraine in 2014. Russia has always denied any involvement in the downing of the flight. Well, let's talk to our correspondent Giles Gibson in Tallinn. So, Giles, has there been any reaction yet to this ruling from Moscow?
There's been some, but not a lot of engagement with this verdict from this Dutch court coming out of Moscow or from the Russian government. The Foreign Ministry has simply said that it's going to study this verdict from this court in the Netherlands. And we've also heard from a well-known senator from Vladimir Putin's United Russia party, saying that, as far as he was concerned, that this verdict was as expected, and that he considers and that his party consider that ruling legally null and void. 2 Russian citizens were convicted by this court, and 1 Russian was acquitted of all of the charges against him. But these 3 Russians were tried in absentia. That's because the Russian government refused to extradite them to the Netherlands to take part in these legal proceedings, saying that that would have been illegal under Russian law.
And Giles, there's been some news on this deal to guarantee grain exports from Ukraine. That's been extended. What more do we know?
Yeah, that deal was set to expire on Saturday, on the 19th of November, and there was a lot of nervousness about the potential shockwaves to global food supplies if that deal had not been extended, but it has for another 120 days, so roughly 4 more months. Really, though, all that does is sort of reset the clock, so now we are sort of ticking down to what's going to happen in 4 months' time. The spokesman for the Russian president, Dmitry Peskov, has said that Russia has received assurances from the United Nations that obstacles will be removed that are currently blocking, as far as they're concerned, exports of Russian agricultural products, and in particular fertilizer. What the Russians have been saying throughout this negotiating process to try to extend this deal is that while there are no specific sanctions on Russian agricultural products, there are other types of sanctions from Western governments, you know, things like sanctions on insurance and shipping, that those have been effectively preventing them from exporting those products. So over the next 120 days, the Russians want to see those obstacles completely removed.
Giles, thank you very much. Our correspondent, Giles Gibson.
A former British diplomat has been freed from jail in Myanmar after being pardoned by the military government. Vicky Bowman, the former UK ambassador to the country, is one of 6,000 political prisoners to be released to mark Myanmar National Day. Bowman and her Burmese husband were jailed in September for allegedly breaching immigration laws.
DPRK has fired a ballistic missile off its east coast, according to South Korea's military. Just hours earlier, Pyongyang threatened fiercer military responses to the United States, boosting security ties with Japan and South Korea. The DPRK has conducted a record number of missile tests this year.
Republicans in the United States have won control of the House of Representatives after 2 years where the Democrats held the majority. This means President Biden's administration could struggle to pass key laws in areas like public spending. Biden congratulated the party on its win and said he was ready to work with Republicans to deliver results for working families.
China says it will speed up COVID-19 vaccinations as cases continue to surge. More than 23,000 new infections were reported on Thursday, the most since April. The government says it will build more designated COVID hospitals and increase the number of beds in intensive care units. China has recently begun to loosen some curbs, saying they will make the restrictions more targeted.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, out of time, out of money and out of patience as COP27 comes to a close, with frustration at the lack of progress.
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there. To see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you. All around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London, China Global Television Network. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference. Facing the unknown is always difficult. In a world in turmoil, it's easy to lose orientation. But when the storms come, we have to see the possibilities. Reinvent. Find new opportunities. Discover a path forward. CGTN. See the difference.
What do we mean when we talk about the difference? The difference is in the detail, in the background,
defense ministers from
the wider angle and perspective of every story. Wherever the story may be. CGTN. See the difference.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe with Jamie Owen and Robin Dwyer. Our top stories. The Asia-Pacific should not be an arena for a big power contest. The message from China's president.
Part of the headlines, the UK's finance minister raises tax on the wealthy to pay out more for pensioners and state benefits as the government tries to rebuild confidence.
More missile strikes reported across Ukraine, leaving 4 people dead and several injured in one of the most intense bombardments of the war.
With just a day to go before the COP27 climate talks in Egypt end, a draft of the final agreement is circulating.
But delegates say many of the key issues are not resolved in the text.
Our correspondent Adel Al-Marouki is at those talks in Sharm el-Sheikh. Adel, so it seems like a draft of the final communique now exists, but no agreement on some of the biggest questions the planet faces. What more do we know? What more can you tell us?
Well, there is a general sense of disappointment across specifically developing countries, and the Secretary General of the UN himself, in a statement released just a couple of hours ago, Antonio Guterres said that he has been briefed while he was in the G20 meeting. He has been briefed by the Egyptian president of COP27, Sameh Shoukry, the Egyptian foreign minister, and through which he believes that there is a critical differences and a huge gap between the North and the South, as he names it, namely developed nations and developing economies. And basically, he summarized the main issues of differences in 3 points. To address issues of loss and damage, still there is no significant agreement about that, just 24 hours before the COP should be concluding. There is a huge issue about committing to reducing emission and bridge the emission gap up to 1.5 degrees more than the pre-industrial levels. That has not been clear in terms of planning. And finally, in terms of financing, committing to the $100 billion promised to developing nations. These 3 issues remain to be the crucial point of differences, and according to the UN Secretary General, they indicate a huge mistrust between the rich developed nations and the developing countries.
Adel, thank you for that. Our correspondent Adel Al-Marouki in Sharm el-Sheikh. Well, the Maldives is one of the small island states that's been pushing hardest for rich countries to compensate those most affected by climate change. We've been talking to the Maldives Climate Minister, Amin Shona, about the challenges that her country faces.
We all know that the Maldives is one of the most vulnerable countries to climate change. We have been voicing and appealing to the global community for higher ambition on climate action for well over 30 years. And today we are at 1.1 degrees of warming. We are witnessing the impacts of climate change. Every single island in the Maldives is undergoing erosion. Every single island in the Maldives' freshwater lens has been contaminated with saltwater intrusion. We have seen increased flooding. Our coral reefs are dying because of warming. We're also a country that is extremely dependent on healthy ocean for both fisheries as well as for tourism. So essentially, with global climate change, it affects the very source of our income, food, and protection as well. Why we are speaking here today on loss and damage is because we have not been heard. We have failed to mitigate, we have failed to reduce our emissions, and that is why we've seen an increase in temperature. We have failed to finance adaptation, particularly for small island nations, and that's why we're here speaking about loss and damage. I do recognize that there is more seriousness and interest from the developed countries on the topic of loss and damage than we have ever had before. I hope we are able to come together and make a final decision on this that is going to be meaningful and effective for countries like ours.
The global energy crisis is boosting demand for alternative energy, with solar power growing at its fastest pace across Europe.
Industry experts in Hungary say demand for installing solar power systems in homes has reached an all-time high, but that rise has been short-lived due to new government policy. Our correspondent Pablo Guterres reports.
Europe's energy crisis is shining a light on the need to invest in renewable energy sources. Solar industry experts believe that the fastest and most effective way to achieve energy independence is through solar power.
We are convinced that due to these changes, the world will never recover to the original situation before time, and the needs for the renewable energy will stay on a high level.
The demand for more solar power is pushing companies to develop new ways of installing photovoltaic cells, which capture the sun's rays and store their energy. Placio, a Hungarian company based in the heart of Budapest, has come up with an alternative. Instead of placing panels on rooftops, they build cell tiles that are so tough they can be placed on the ground.
So you can drive through by car or bicycles. Obviously, you can walk or jump on it, so this is really durable.
Before the Ukraine conflict triggered a scramble to find alternative energy sources, solar power provided only 7% of Hungary's electricity needs. By this summer, that had doubled to 14%. But just as more people in this country switched to solar, the government banned new customers from reselling leftover energy back into the power grid.
All of us in the solar industry were surprised when Hungary's government decided to suspend new solar installations to connect to the power grid.
Hungary's government says the new rule is necessary because there's more demand than the grid can absorb. Critics say Hungary's new solar power regulation will put the brakes on the development of the industry in this country. New photovoltaic installations will now have to use all of the energy they generate or store it in battery systems, which could be costly. For solar power companies, the new rules shifted their focus. They are now concentrating their efforts in countries where they see solar power as having a brighter future.
We are interested in the Central European business, which is not only Hungary, and the needs for the renewable solar energy is unbreakable in that region.
Placio Solar sees brighter prospects in Spain and Germany. Their solar systems are also in demand in Mexico, and they hope to break into the U.S. market.
95% of the sales and demand are coming outside of Hungary.
And as solar power development goes dark in Hungary, industry leaders say newer technologies that don't require customers to plug into a country's power grid will provide true energy independence. Pablo Gutierrez, CGTN, Budapest.
The transition to renewable energy is at the centre of all plans to tackle global warming. Pascal Radu is the CEO of GE Hydro Solutions. I asked him to explain the part that hydropower can play.
I think, hydropower has a critical role, and basically generally renewable has a critical role to play in this mitigation of climate change. when I think about hydro, what we can offer is firm capacity at a very, very low carbon footprint. And that will contribute significantly to the security of supply. Today, hydropower is already, I think we should not forget, producing 16% of the world's power. So that's a huge source of clean power that we're already producing with hydro. And then there's another niche of hydropower, or niche is something called pumped storage, which is basically a giant natural battery. And that is the only available long-term duration energy storage solution that we have today. And that's, I think, what makes me very, very excited. And I think that's where hydropower can really play a big role.
When we talk about hydropower, though, in the context of renewable energy, it has perhaps a less high profile than, let's say, wind or solar energy. Why do you think that is? Is it because of its reliability, or because projects can be sometimes controversial when it comes to the impacts they have on the land?
I think, honestly, it's because hydropower is something that has been a given. Hydropower is probably the oldest form of power generation that we have. So I think we're taking this a little bit of for granted across the world, that it's there. It's been there for tens and sometimes hundreds of years. So I think that's given the profile of hydropower, therefore, is in some countries pretty low, because it's just taken as a given. I think with the energy change, or the energy transition that we need to go through now in the future, I think that profile of hydropower needs to be highlighted again as something which can very significantly contribute to the energy transition, and fundamentally to mitigate climate change.
Let's talk about COP27. We're coming to the end of this climate conference. What's your sense? Do you think there'll be enough movement on key issues?
I think there will be. I think there's always movement. Whether there's enough is always a different question. But I think fundamentally there is a movement which we cannot stop towards a much cleaner and CO2-free future. When it comes to hydropower, I think what we need to have is that the policymakers really help us to find better ways of financing these hydropower stations, and also making sure that through hydropower we can have very steady revenue streams, which basically enable these power stations and make them bankable. And last but not least, I think it's very, very important also that we trust or we are supporting the hydropower sustainability standard that the hydropower industry has developed over the last 2 years with NGOs and other partners, stakeholders, that we really are very much making sure that when we install hydropower, we install it according to the principles of fully sustainable hydropower that we set out in that standard.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, astronauts on board the Tiangong space station complete their third spacewalk.
Events have consequences. Words create impact.
Unprecedented scenes that we saw.
The clean-up operation is now well and truly underway.
Parts of southern Europe remain in a state of emergency.
Context gives meaning. People make history.
Far more than 1,000 people have come here today.
But authorities are still on high alert.
So now we've actually become the border on this road.
A complex world demands a comprehensive view.
But with the cleanup efforts more or less under control,
the economic impact is bound to ripple across the country. There's plastic pollution everywhere.
Because the world today matters for your world tomorrow.
This is the living area of the crew.
The focus is firmly on future technologies.
Well, this is something completely different.
The world today, every day on CGTN.
Hello, welcome back to Global Business Europe. NASA's next generation moon rocket captured a view of Earth as it made its way to the moon.
The 32-story crewless space launch system blasted off from the Kennedy Space Center in Cape Canaveral. The flight restarts the U.S. Space Agency's exploration program 50 years after the final Apollo moon mission. Our correspondent Hendrik Sybrandy reports.
And liftoff of Artemis 1.
The night sky along the east coast of Florida lit up as Artemis 1 lifted off at 1:47 Wednesday morning. Powered by 4 main engines and 2 side boosters, the nearly 100-meter-tall Space Launch System, or SLS rocket, with the Orion spacecraft on top, began its long-awaited journey to the moon and back.
This is something that we haven't done for over 50 years.
Engineer Heather McKay is with Lockheed Martin, the aerospace company which built key components of Orion at its facility in Colorado. The capsule and rocket have been tested every which way on the ground.
But there's no substitute for actually seeing the spacecraft, how it operates in the space environment. So we'll be collecting all that data and looking to see how the spacecraft performs and showing that, yes, it is ready to put humans on it.
20 feet. It was December 1972 when astronauts last set foot on the lunar surface. Only data collecting mannequins are on board Orion for this inaugural Artemis mission, which will cover 2 million kilometers during the 26-day flight.
We need to learn about the vehicles before we put crew on them for Artemis 2. It also sets us up long-term at the moon.
The mission, years behind schedule and billions of dollars over budget, experienced some recent challenges. A hurricane did minor damage to Orion. 2 launch attempts were scrubbed. Turns out the third time was the charm.
The journey of a million miles often begins with a scrub.
McKay, who helped develop Orion's launch abort system, says the Artemis team will, among other things, test the spacecraft's solar arrays, crew life support procedures, and heat shield during re-entry to Earth's atmosphere.
We can push the spacecraft, a little bit harder when we don't have humans on it to kind of understand the bounds of the design and prove that it's ready.
The goal is to fly 4 astronauts on the next Artemis mission in 2024, paving the way for a moon landing the year after, all part of a new era of deep space exploration that began with a bang on this day.
Today we got to witness the world's most powerful rocket take the Earth by its edges and shake the wicked out of it, and it was quite a sight. It's quite a sight.
It's the culmination of years of work.
This is my work baby for sure. So I'm going to be watching, tuning in the whole time, and just really excited to see it perform. This is what we work and what we live for.
If all goes according to schedule, this historic mission will end with Artemis' splashdown in the Pacific Ocean on December 11th. Hendrik Sybrandy, CGTN, Denver.
Astronauts on China's Tiangong space station have completed their 3rd spacewalk. 3 crew members worked on installing connections between different modules during their 5 hours outside.
Their 6-month mission began back in June. Another group of astronauts will be sent up later this year in China's first in-orbit crew rotation. China aims to complete the space station by the end of this year.
Now, one of the world's biggest sporting events is just days away. Players from around the world are heading to Qatar for the FIFA World Cup. Germany's squad landed in Doha looking to secure their 5th World Cup title. They start their campaign against Japan next week. Argentina's squad, spearheaded by Lionel Messi, played their final World Cup warm-up in the United Arab Emirates. The tournament starts on Sunday.
So it all starts Sunday, the first time the football tournament, one of the world's most popular sporting events, has been held in the Middle East.
It's also the first ever World Cup to be held during the Northern Hemisphere's winter. So what's at stake? Our correspondent Siobhan McCall explains.
32 teams are taking part in the 2022 World Cup. Qatar, who qualified automatically as hosts, are the only team who haven't played at the tournament before. Brazil make a record 22nd appearance. They are the only team to have qualified for every single World Cup. Well, France are the holders, and they are looking to become the first team to win back-to-back World Cups since 1962. But it's Brazil who are the favourites to be crowned champions. There's more on offer for the winning team than just a trophy. They'll earn over $40 million. It's not too bad for the other teams either. They'll all get at least $1.4 million as FIFA prize money, no matter how they get on. More than 1 million football fans are travelling to Qatar, and aside from the host, the best supported team might come as a bit of a surprise. It's the United States, with their fans buying up almost 150,000 tickets. And the eyes of the world will be on Qatar. 4 billion people watched the 2018 tournament, and FIFA expects that number to be even higher this time, with around 5 billion people tuning in. That's 63% of the world's total population.
Well, as the competition gets underway, Brazil, the only country to have taken the title 5 times, is hoping to bring 20 years without a win to an end in Qatar.
One Brazilian fan is working around the clock, making replicas of the famous trophy. Our correspondent Lucrecia Franco reports.
As Brazil prepares to compete for its 6th World Cup trophy in Qatar, a passionate Brazilian football fan is putting the final touches on his own version of the cup. Since 1994, the year Brazil won its 4th title, Jarbas Meneghini, a 54-year-old mechanic, has been producing thousands of replicas in his own home. Every 4 years, he transforms his patio into a makeshift workshop that has made him famous. He's now one of Brazil's most well-known makers of FIFA World Cup trophy replicas.
Since I was a kid, my dream was becoming a professional football player. It didn't work, but my devotion to the sport never faded, and I keep it alive by making the replicas, selling them, and giving them to my idols.
In another room, Jarbas built a sort of museum where he keeps one of his most precious possessions, a trophy replica signed by Neymar, the captain of the Brazilian national team. Here he also has photos of the ones he has given to Pelé, Brazil's coach Chichi, Ronaldo and Ronaldinho, among other Brazilian football stars. And this year, Jarbas is struggling to keep up with demand. He has received more than 3,000 orders so far, and they keep coming in. Helping him night and day is his 80-year-old mother Laurinda, and part of his big family.
Of my 6 children, Jarbas is the one who loves football the most, and I take a lot of pleasure in giving him a hand. He made me a football fan, and I love rooting with him.
Each replica costs around $28 and is made of a secret formula that includes plaster, clay, and cement, which is then sprayed paint gold.
Brasil é super favorito nessa Copa do Qatar 2022.
Brazil is heading to Qatar 2022 as one of the favourites. They haven't won for a long time, since 2002. 20 years without feeling the thrill of lifting the real gold trophy and bringing it to where it belongs. This cup is Brazilian.
Lucrecia Franco, CGTN, Rio de Janeiro.
I think he's excited. That's it for Global Business Europe. Thank you for watching.
There's more on all our stories at europe.cgtn.com, and do follow CGTN Europe on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram.
We're on smart TV apps, Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, YouTube, Dailymotion, CGTN.com and the CGTN app, and in the UK on Freeview.
Coming up next on CGTN, it's Africa Live. We'll see you again tomorrow, same time, same place. From all the team in London, goodbye.
Goodbye.